All right, we can get started. So, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of EPM Coffee Chat Podcast. Um, my name is Arun. I'm a co-host of the podcast. I have Hirsch, Asmat, and Fred with me, and we do have a special guest today, Jake. So, welcome, Jake. Good morning. We're very
Thank you.
happy.
I'm happy to be here.
Yeah, it's awesome. So maybe first we'll start with an introduction, Jake. I don't think anybody needs introduction, but still, let's go ahead and do that.
Sure. My name is Jake Turrell, and I'm an EPM solution architect. My day-to-day job is working with various clients, implementing mostly Oracle Cloud EPM planning, but also EDMCS, all of the reporting packages, all of the related data integration. Everything from kind of managing projects, doing technical implementations. Usually I'm doing end-to-end implementations. And yeah, I'm happy to be here. I mean, I know you guys are huge contributors to the Oracle EPM space. Anybody who's an Oracle ace, which most of you are, I know that takes a tremendous amount of work. And, I've been reading your blogs, Fred, especially your blog for a while. Asmat, I've known about you guys for a long time, so I'm really happy to be here speaking with you.
So, me as well. So I would just say that when I first started out in EPM, yours was one of the first blogs that I started reading. And I still remember when REST APIs were introduced back in the day. Yeah. Your blog was the first blog that I read, and I played around with REST APIs, Groovy and REST APIs. So yeah, I still remember those days. So thank you. All right. But let's kick it off, guys. So anybody on the call, if you have questions, please feel free to put it in the chat or Q&A, and we'll answer it live. And yeah, we'll get started. So Harsh, Asmat, and Fred, fire away.
I think I can kick it off with just like the first question, which is, how did you get started in EPM?
The answer is I got lucky. I got really lucky. So I was getting an MIS degree at UT in Austin and went through the career services office there, and Dell had this fantastic intern program. And I applied for this internship not really knowing what it was, and it turned out to be a role for being a microcontrol administrator. And I don't know if you guys know what microcontrol is. This will definitely kind of date me, but microcontrol was the DOS-based predecessor to Hyperion Enterprise. And so Dell had kind of figured out that it was cheaper to hire interns than it was to build a batch process. And so I'd go in at 3 o'clock in the afternoon, work on some reporting stuff, and then everybody would leave the office, and I would dump the data from the ledger, get it all loaded up in the microcontrol, get it all calculated, run the reports, do all the tie-outs. We had this whole checklist that they had developed so that interns could do this. And that's how I got started. And it was a fantastic program. I had really great bosses and coworkers. And yeah, I got really lucky to stumble into it. And so after that, I graduated and I went to work for EY for a few years. And there I did more kind of little bit of relational data warehousing, a lot of just billing systems, things like that. And I decided I wanted to get back into the EPM space. I really enjoyed it. The whole idea of a multi-dimensional database kind of clicked with my brain. And I found this boutique Hyperion partner in Dallas. And again, just got really lucky. This was a firm where everyone in the company owned shares in the company. They had open financials. It was a really very well-run company. And man, did they invest in my knowledge. I mean, just, put me through boot camps. I got to work with a lot of really bright technical people and just a lot of good leaders in general. And so that's how I got started. And I worked there for about 5 years, and I'd kind of made my way up to some kind of minor management positions. I was leading a team, and I realized that wasn't necessarily what I really enjoyed. What I really enjoyed was actually doing the implementation. And I'm kind of happiest if you can put me in a dark room and let me code for a while. So, I was on a project, but I got a call from a recruiter, and he was a specialist recruiter in the EPM space, and he had a project that was 9 months long. It was going to involve a lot of travel, but it was an offer I couldn't say no to. And that was my first independent project. And that was about 23 years ago. So I've been an independent consultant for well over 20 years. And, it started with a phone call from a recruiter.
Arun, you might be on mute. We cannot hear you.
I was saying, you said 23 years as an independent consultant. My whole career is 20 years. It's fun. So, how was the transition from being full-time permanent to being an independent consultant?
That's a good question. So that transition is interesting because, for those first 3 months, you don't sleep very well, right? You're sitting there thinking, okay, I'm on a project, I'm showing up, am I going to get paid? Is the project going to get canceled? Have I forgotten to do something like get the appropriate level of insurance? Or, you're figuring out just, how do you register with the Secretary of State to form an LLC? Once you figure all of that stuff out, it's really pretty easy. The transition was nice because I actually found that at least once the company was set up and I had insurance and basic things like that, and I had a client, I actually ended up with a little bit less administrative work. I wasn't going out working on sales calls, and I wasn't working on training a whole team, and I wasn't writing reviews and doing all the things that you have to do when you run a company. When you're trying to operate a company, there's a lot more responsibility. When you're an independent consultant, I kind of refer to it as a junior varsity business. It's a JV business because all you have to worry about is yourself. And that's a very different proposition to running a firm.
Yeah. I get it. But I'm guessing there is still some administrative work that you would do, right? Like you obviously have to submit your timesheet, keep track of your time, expenses, and all that kind of stuff.
Yeah, I mean, you still have the T&E stuff. And what's interesting is in some ways, you're right, there is more administrative work because you're going out and you're saying, well, I'm going to write a blog, or I'm going to go present at a conference, or I'm going to go volunteer with the user group. All of those things do equate to more work, but they're things that you're choosing to do. And so for some reason, it just feels like there's less of a burden. It's something that you're excited about doing and less something somebody's kind of telling you have to do.
Yeah,
and maybe that's just a mental thing myself, but it worked for me.
Yeah, and I was going to say, I think that's a really good story. I really follow your blog also when I started in Hyperion. But do you have any favorite customers or locations that you recommend? Or
no? Yeah. Well, I'm at a very good customer right now, and it's probably my longest project. So most of my projects end up being like 4 to 6 to 8 months. I just crossed the 2-year mark at my last customer, and they're a good customer for a number of reasons. One, it's an industry I like, it's banking. Two, they're willing to take risks and try some unconventional designs, one of which we'll talk about later. We're actually going to be presenting that solution at Kscope, but it has worked out really, really well. And, you know, with appropriate prototyping, and, you know, it's not like they just let me do anything, but with appropriate prototyping, they're willing to try new things and, you know, things that other customers haven't necessarily done. And so they're a great client. Now, in terms of locations, man, I mean, I've had some pretty good locations. I've also had some pretty rough locations. But, you know, I've had clients, you know, send me to London, things like that. And, you know, I was on a long-term project in New York City, which was fantastic. You know, I've gotten pretty lucky, but inevitably you're going to end up in, you know, Chattanooga or, you know, some other, maybe not as exciting town.
What's your favorite airport?
My favorite what?
Airport.
Oh boy, that's a tricky question because I do not like airports. I will tell you that DFW Airport is probably the best when it comes to getting into security because they have tons of different entry points, right? The airports that I really don't enjoy are things like Atlanta and Denver, where they shuttle everyone through a single line, and it just feels like it's never gonna end. So for just pure efficiency, DFW is pretty good. But San Francisco has this really cool thing where it's a quiet airport. They don't have all the loudspeakers, and they actively control the noise level in the airport, and it's incredibly peaceful. And you go through that airport and you just think, man, everybody else is doing this wrong. So probably SFO.
There's some echo coming from your end. Like,
An echo from my end?
echo and a little bit of static as well.
Yeah, I don't know what to do there. Just using a regular mic. I can go try to turn off the AC. That might be making noise.
Yeah, it's more like a static. I don't think it's the AC that's causing the noise. Yeah, stop now.
Okay.
Yeah, let's go.
Could just be the internet connection. Who knows?
Yeah. Could be. All right. So one more question, and then I'll pass it on to others. How often do you travel? Has it changed? I know COVID was a time when travel was completely off the books. Before that, and obviously travel was there, but it's almost 4 years now after the COVID. Have you picked up travel? How does that look like now?
Yeah, I mean, obviously before COVID, I was traveling nonstop for years and years and years, every week. But right before COVID, I ended up with a couple of clients whose finance departments were spread across the United States, and none of them traveled. We did everything remote, even before COVID. And then COVID hit and I wasn't traveling then. Now, it's definitely picked up. My last project, you know, the customer said, hey, we'd like you to be on site full time, or at least up to 75%. And we did that for a while. And then I moved from Texas to Pennsylvania, and that made travel pretty tough. And so we renegotiated a little bit. I'm traveling every other week right now. So 1 week on, 1 week off. And that seems to be working pretty well. But I definitely see travel picking up, you know, probably not to pre-COVID terms, but it's definitely picking up.
And a question from the chat, actually, was the first project as an independent consultant scary? And were there any doubts about your decision to become independent at the time?
It was scary, and I definitely had doubts. What was interesting about that project is we were actually getting rid of planning. So this was an early version of planning. and the customer wanted a bunch of in-sheet allocations. So allocations that happened in a grid as the user watched them. And back then you couldn't do that. And so we were pulling out planning and replacing it with this big VBA solution that was, I mean, we had a ton of S-based servers and partitions across them. It was a huge application. And yeah, I was pretty nervous. You know, you're just figuring out things like invoicing, you're figuring out how to operate as just a company. And I did not sleep well for the first 3 months. And after that, you realize, okay, you know, I'm getting paid regularly, and you know, my family's not going to starve, and this wasn't some major career mistake. You know, it all worked out. But what you'll see with other folks is people will pop in and out of being independent, right? You know, several people on this call have been independent. And so, you know, it doesn't have to be a lifetime decision. And it shouldn't be. If it's not working out for you, go do something else, right? If you get a better opportunity from a company, you should take it, right? For me, it has just happened to work out. And I think it's important to note that at least part of the reason for that is luck. You know, I haven't had some of those bad timing situations where I just couldn't line up a project for 3 or 4 months. You know, I think the most time that I've spent on the bench over my career is maybe 3 weeks, maybe 4, but I don't think so. And so some amount of that is luck, just the stars aligned and the right project was in the right place at the right time at the right rate. But, you know, there are plenty of ways where that could have gone not as well. And that might have, you know, made me maybe choose other options. Now, I do think there are some things you can do to improve your odds. And so, for example, you know, I worked on that blog for a long time, and anybody that's looked at my blog knows it's completely stale. I haven't updated it in ages. I might go back to working on that, but you probably heard the phrase, dig your well early. You know, you want to start marketing yourself. You want to have a blog. You want to be presenting at user groups, whether it's a local user group or whether it's ODTUG at Kscope. You want to start getting involved in other organizations for a couple of reasons. One, it broadens your reach, right? It makes your network a lot deeper. 2, it'll help you deepen your technical skills. You know, there's no better way to learn something than to write a blog about it. And I've written blogs about plenty of things that I didn't know about just so I could learn them. That's actually one of my favorite presentation hacks for a user group is don't let the fact that you don't know something prevent you from submitting an abstract, because when you get selected, you will find a way to learn it. And I've done that more than once. But anyway, yeah, you want to do those sorts of things that kind of start to broaden your network. And you know, that kind of gets into what are some of the pros and cons of being independent.
Yeah.
And there are definitely some cons. You know, one of the cons is you don't have this company full of resources that you can just reach out to at any moment. But there are ways to develop that network on your own, even though it's not part of your company. You know, for me, ODTUG was an excellent path to sort of get that network of people that I could reach out to. You know, there are lots of other cons. You know, the original question was, were you nervous? And I was, and it turned out that I had good reason to be nervous. You know, later on, I ended up on a project where I was traveling back and forth to New York City, and I was working subcontracting to a large systems integrator. And you can never go directly to that particular systems integrator. You have to subcontract through one of these little companies that feed into it. And that company was not great at paperwork. And at one point I had gone 180 days without getting paid. And that's a long time. And I was racking up, travel expenses going back and forth to New York City, and New York City hotels are not cheap. And so, you're sitting there looking at that very large credit card statement that's increasing every week. You're looking at the fact that they haven't paid you on time. And that can get pretty nerve-wracking. Now, the good news is that has only happened to me once, and I did get paid. I got paid for everything. It's just they were very, very slow. So, that's kind of, I guess, another con.
I had a question, Jay.
Right? Sorry?
No, I was going to ask, because being in a company has resources that you can reach out to. Not only that, right? Because you may have access to, let's say, an Oracle University account. You may have access to demo instances where you can play around. So when you go independent, what are some of the ways, one, to keep yourself updated, learn new things? Two, if you need access to, let's say, an instance and things like that, how do you manage that?
Yeah, that gets into a really interesting topic about why EPM is good for independence. And it's because there are these huge barriers to entry, right? You're not going to have a massive amount of competition because people can't just go to the internet and learn EPM, right? You used to be able to set up your own pods, and that's kind of what led me to create that first set of blog posts, but you can't do that now. And so what that means is once you kind of pass that threshold and you get the knowledge, there are going to be fewer people competing with you. Now, the downside is when you land on the bench, most of the time you don't have access to a pod. And, you can beg, borrow, and steal, but you're going to end up with times where you just don't have access. And, every once in a while, a client will let you use a test pod or something, a former client that you've got a good relationship with. But yeah, there are definitely times I've ended up without a pod, and it makes you nervous because you want to stay on top of the technology. But you mentioned something else, and that is the training resources. If we're talking about the pros and cons of being independent, one of the cons is, I don't have access to Oracle University. It's pretty expensive. But I do get to go to whatever training I want to go to. I just have to pay for it. And I probably spend about $3,000 to $5,000 a year on training alone. And it's just part of the cost of doing business. It is a write-off, so Uncle Sam is paying for part of it, but it's still coming out of your pocket. And the answer is, I see a lot of posts online that, how do I learn EPM without paying for it? And the answer is, that's really hard, right? You can go read blog posts. That'll get you some of the way there. But, the fastest way to get started in EPM is to go take a boot camp. One of these 5-day courses, either from Oracle or from KeyTeach or one of those other companies. There are several partner firms out there that actually teach boot camps. That 5-day boot camp for planning is probably the best way to get started, but it's expensive and you're going to pay for it.
Yeah, you're right. I do account reconciliation trainings, and every time I post that, okay, I'm starting my new batch, people kind of expect that it is free, and I'm like, no, I'm investing my time, my resources, and everything into it. I can't do it free.
And everybody underestimates how long it takes to build quality training curriculum. It takes a very long time. Building exercises, making sure there's a logical flow to it. You probably tested your training on people. It's expensive for a reason, but it's also the fastest way to get up to speed. On my current client, we're implementing EDMCS, and the client knew I was new to EDMCS, and they were like, "That's okay. We want you to work on this." I said, "We're going to have to take the EDMCS boot camp," and so I took it. I paid for myself, of course, but the client sent a couple of their people as well, and it gave us a tremendous leg up. I mean, it was money really, really well spent. So.
Hey Jake, I also wanted, to ask maybe questions related when it's the time to become independent. So let's say, you have 3 years of experience, you have 10 years of experience, and whether you have, family, you or alone, all of those kind of things that, you will keep in mind, whether you should go that route or not. Also, like, should you wait until you get something? Should you stay in the company? And how would you get started? Like, should you wait just a recruiter? Can you give maybe some insights to that?
I love this question because it's the same answer as the question, when is the right time to have a baby? And the answer is there's never a good time. If you're waiting for that ideal time when the stars just align and everything is going well, when I went independent, I think it was when the first Gulf War had started and the economy was pretty shaky and people were nervous. And everybody looked at me and said, "You're leaving a very good company. What are you doing? This is crazy." And the answer is, well, there's never a great time. Now, you did ask a very specific question, and that was, should you wait until you have an opportunity lined up? And I would say generally, yeah, you probably want to have something ready to go. And not just any project, you probably want that first one to be on the long-term side, right? You don't want to just go for a 2 or 3 month project for your first one, because you're going to be worried about lining up that next one just too soon before you've had time to kind of get comfortable in that new environment. So my first project was 9 months, and it was with a very solid, well-known customer, and that I think took away some risk. And that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to de-risk the situation because it's inherently risky, right?
And if I can follow up, Jake, quickly. So what do you think would be appropriate, experience to have someone to get started as independent? Because as you mentioned, like you have no team, you have no one to reach out unless you have a good networking. So what do you think would be a good, years of experience to get started? And just to supplement this question, once you get started, how do you envision your retirement? Because, younger people, younger people, they are faster, they learn faster. So how do you handle that?
So let's start with the first part of the question. How much experience should you have? And I'm going to give the typical consultant answer. It depends. I've seen people go independent who just build FR reports. You can do that without a ton of experience. And chances are, if you do that, you're going to work with other people who are going to give you more experience, maybe on the application or database side. There are ways to do it without a ton of experience. I had worked with planning in S-Space for about 5 years, and I thought I was pretty good at it. I didn't know what I didn't know, and I certainly got a lot better after I went independent. But you don't have to be at the absolute top of your field, but your rate will probably reflect that, right? What was the other part of your question? I'm so sorry. I got sidetracked.
How do you envision
retirement? That's actually one of the best things about being independent is, at least in the United States, there's this thing called a self-employed 401k. And it is probably one of the very best legal ways to avoid taxes in existence. Now, the reason for that is what you do is you create your own 401k, and mine's through Fidelity, but you can set it up with Schwab or Vanguard, any of those companies. have them. Actually, I think Vanguard actually just got rid of their self-employed 401ks because they figured out they weren't making any money on them. But it's very easy to set up, a handful of forms. You have to file an annual form, and if you don't file it, you get in big trouble with big fines. But it allows you to defer by putting money into those funds. It allows you to defer a tremendous amount of income, which lowers your taxable income. And that's how I'm going to retire, because I've done my best to max it out every year. And you do it because if you don't do it, your taxes are pretty tough. Another downside to being self-employed is that you're not just paying your portion of the taxes, but you're paying the employer's portion of the taxes as well. And so your effective tax rate ends up being pretty high. The way you reduce that is by contributing to a self-employed 401k. Now, what that means is that at the end of the year, you're writing a big check and you're writing it to yourself. So that's a good thing, right? But at the end of the year, you're just broke because you just took all of this sort of accumulated earnings that you've had and you just dump it into your 401k so that you don't have to pay taxes.
Yeah.
So it does force, one of the good things about it is it forces you to be frugal throughout the year, because you've got to build this war chest that then going to dump into your 401k and you won't be able to touch it until you're 65.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
There are a couple of questions in the chat. So, Jake, one of the questions is, how do you foresee the future of EPM folks with AI agents being introduced for, let's say, administrative tasks and stuff like that?
So, I look forward to that in a number of ways. One, I think it will take away some of the monotony of the job of dealing with the routine tasks. At the same time, I am not in any way worried about AI taking my job away. AI is not good at gathering requirements because, to be honest, sometimes customers aren't good at providing you requirements. Sometimes customers struggle with exactly what they want. AI is not going to be good at dealing with bad data. There are so many things that we do in an EPM implementation that AI is, probably a very, very long way away from solving. But will it improve certain aspects of the job? Yeah, no doubt.
All right. One very important question I think all of us has is, okay, you've decided to go independent. You got your first client. That is going to end in, let's say, a month or 2 months, whatever. How do you find the next client or customer?
This is a great question because there are a couple of avenues and you want to explore every single one of them. So one of the things you'll have to decide is, are you going to only deal with customers who go directly through you, or are you going to subcontract to other firms? I do both. And the reason I do both is, for me, the difference between a good year and a great year is generally not that related to rate. It's mostly related to utilization. If I can stay busy throughout the year, I'm going to have a much better year than if I had 1 or 2 big gaps. The way you avoid those gaps is by basically not just having to go out and find your own customers, but working with other firms who will subcontract you. And almost all of the boutique EPM firms use subcontractors, and almost all of the big 4 firms use subcontractors. And in fact, the big 4 firms, they all have portals specifically designed for dealing with people like me. PwC has one, Accenture has one, EY has one. I think KPMG has one, and it might be the same one that Deloitte uses. So they've got these companies that set up these portals just for dealing with subcontractors. So you've got your direct clients which is always what we ideally like. You know, generally the rate's a little bit better. And that's your relationship, and that's good to have. But then you've got relationships that you want to start forging with subcontractors or with other consulting firms. Then the third option is there are some really good specialist recruiters out there. And you guys have talked to some of them in the past. You know, I think that was a really interesting podcast that you guys did. And these are all avenues you want to explore, all of them. You want to keep those relationships, you know, alive. And, you know, especially when working with subcontracting to consulting firms, the nice thing about that is if you do a good job, they're going to line up your next project for you and your next project. And I've had a couple of firms where I just had a string of projects where I didn't have to do sales. And that takes a lot of the stress and pressure away from being independent. And it works out well for them too, because what these firms don't want to do is grow too much and then have people sitting on the bench. That's very expensive for a consulting firm. And so if they have this percentage of their business that they're running, you know, through subcontractors like me, they're able to basically optimize their costs. And if they don't have a project for me, they don't have to lay me off. They don't have to continue paying my salary. You know, it's a good way for them to optimize their capacity to deliver projects. And, you know, I've never shied away from subcontracting to other firms. The other nice thing about that when you subcontract to firms is all of a sudden you've got access to all these people who can help you when you run into technical problems. And there are people that can be your mentors and that you can learn from. So, you know, some of my greatest mentors have come through firms that I've subcontracted to. You know, and man, if I've talked about luck a couple of times, but one of the luckiest things that's happened to me is just being able to work with some great people. You know, you guys know who Kyle Goodfriend is, right? I've gotten to work with Kyle multiple times. You have no idea what a gift that is when you can sit down with one of the best groovy experts in the world, and he'll sit there and teach you and train you, and he's interested in building you up. And, you know, I've worked with a couple of people like that were just amazing resources. And so, yeah, subcontracting is a great avenue.
Yeah, I agree with you. I like the engagement with PwC. I learned a lot from the managing director. So he was running the sessions, and it was amazing to see the way he was running this. So I've learned a lot. So I agree that when you work with some of those people, you learn a lot.
Yeah, and I've worked with PwC on a couple of projects, and they were both, you know, really great learning opportunities. One of my best mentors, Natalie Delamar, was, you know, she was a former president of ODTUG, and she's PwC. And so, yeah, you know, those relationships and those opportunities, they're really important.
So do you still keep in touch with ODTUG? And I know you're presenting K-Scope, but ODTUG, are you still part of anything there?
Yeah, so I guess we haven't really talked about that much. So maybe I should go into what my relationship was with them. I started out volunteering with ODTUG, just presenting, right? And like almost everybody, you know, I submitted that first abstract, and of course I got rejected. Everyone does. I mean, most people get rejected. There's so many applications, but I kept applying, and I applied the next year, and I presented, and then I won an award. And let me tell you how addictive that is. You know, you get this really nice, it was this engraved kaleidoscope and with your name on it. And that really got me hooked. And I started presenting more and more. And then I started, you know, I volunteered on one of the abstract selection committees. And that was really interesting because it gives you a tremendous amount of insight into how they pick abstracts. And even with that information, I still have abstracts rejected all the time. But then I ran for the board. And once you get on the board, you realize how much these people are working to try to provide you with a good learning experience, and they're all volunteers. And the board was a tremendous amount of work. Then I got elected to be treasurer, and that was even more fascinating because now you really know how the sausage is made. And one of the absolute highlights of my career has been volunteering with ODTUG. I got to meet and work with a lot of very impressive people, and a lot of people that were very dedicated and hardworking, and none of them are getting paid, So there are no financial incentives to doing it. But coming out in the end is one of the greatest opportunities I've ever had.
Yeah,
so right now, to answer just to finish up your question, I'm not volunteering on any committees or anything like that. I did stay on the finance subcommittee for a little while. And then one of the things you have to consider is when you're in those roles, you don't want to be in there too long because you're trying to create opportunities for other people. And so that's one of the reasons, I don't know if you guys know this, but they actually have term limits on the board. And it's because they want to make sure that you don't have the same people in the same roles forever. They're trying to provide opportunities for all of us. And so, I've tapered off my involvement, and but man, am I super grateful for everything that organization has done for me. And then this year I'll be presenting at Kscope, and I'm really excited to be there.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great opportunity. Like the friends that you make for life, that's always there.
Yeah, and ODTUG is a great organization, but it's not the only one. There are a lot of local user groups, and if there's not one, start one. Right? You can start a user group that there are no requirements, really. It's an open playing field. And so I was involved with the North Texas and the South Texas Hyperion user group for a while. Those were great experiences. And, because I know Kscope is expensive. And, if you can't get there, do something locally.
Yeah. I think we organize local events in Toronto. So we have one coming on June 4th. So
yeah.
So Jake, tell us about your Kscope presentation.
So my Kscope presentation this year, I'm really lucky to be presenting with a customer. It's Bank of Oklahoma, and we built a custom workforce planning application. And what makes that application interesting is it is 100% hybrid. So we have no AGs in the database whatsoever. You put in a number at the bottom of the database, it's immediately reflected at the top of the house. And it's about 80, maybe 85% Groovy. So we're doing everything through right-click menus on a dashboard. There was a long history leading up to this implementation. About 15 years ago, I had worked on the original implementation out at the bank, and another person had done the original workforce module implementation. I don't know if you guys remember the original workforce modules, but they were more like sample applications, right? It wasn't like today. We had implemented that, then another firm had taken them to the cloud, and they were just never a really big fan of the workforce module, partly because it's a pretty complex application. And we can get into all the reasons why it's complex, but it has to solve a lot of different problems for a lot of different customers. What we did is, we kind of put that away and built a very custom solution that really only addressed the needs of this particular customer. And it ended up being super high performance and very easy for the users to navigate and much more intuitive for them. And so what makes it unique is really the fact that it's 100% hybrid with no AGs and almost all Groovy business rules. And we can talk about Groovy. There are different schools of thought about Groovy, and I'm on the far end of that spectrum. So, what are your guys' thoughts on Groovy? Are you guys using it?
I love Groovy. if I get a chance to use Groovy, that's what I'm going for. So I love Groovy. I like it's like one of
Yeah,
the best features introduced in EPM in some long time, along with pipeline. I think pipeline is another one that I love the most.
yeah. There's this sentiment, especially on LinkedIn, where people will say, well, you should only use Groovy if you absolutely have to. And there are other people that are like, I don't want to learn another language. I don't agree with either of those sentiments. And we're going to go into this in depth in my presentation. But Groovy, how many programmers are out there do you think that can write a good business rule? I actually asked ChatGPT this question a while ago. ChatGPT thinks it's 2,000 to 5,000 developers worldwide. That's who can write a business rule. Now, if you say how many of those folks are good at it, that's a smaller number, right? How many Java programmers do you think are out there in the world?
Huge.
A gajillion. There's so many. And as you know, Groovy uses Java syntax. And so one of the nice things about Groovy is there are tons and tons and tons of people who can use it, right? Much, much more than can write a business rule. And so, just from a pure resourcing perspective, I think Groovy is very interesting. It's also just a scripting language in the end, and scripting languages are among the easiest languages to learn. So I'm a big fan. My customer is very happy. We did multiple Groovy classes leading up to this implementation, and they're pretty comfortable with it now. And it's allowed us to have what feels like a very light and nimble workforce planning application, which is not something you can say about most workforce apps.
Yeah, you're right. You touched on a good point. I run into a lot of consultants who write business rules, but not write efficient business rules. Yes, you can write business, but to make it work efficiently is an art. So yeah.
Yeah, and think about some of the abstract things that you have to know about to write a business rule. Block creation, for example. Block creation, even when you understand it, there's some weird voodoo out there where things don't always act like you think they should. Well, when you're writing a business rule in Groovy, especially if you're using in-memory grids to submit the data, block creation is not a thing, right? Yes. You submit the data in a grid and it sticks. You don't have to worry, did the block get created? So that's just one of the fun things that I think is interesting about Groovy.
Yeah, and all of the validations that you can use before the data is submitted. So all of those are like really awesome, like awesome features of Groovy, right?
Yeah, there's just this whole list of things, and I think the opportunity to prevent bad data from being saved in your database is certainly in the top 5.
There's a question in the chat. I was going to answer saying that the question is, most of the documentation for Groovy is general, not EPM specific. Are there any websites and sources that you recommend to learn? I was just going to say, okay, Kyle's course, just take Kyle's course and that's it. But there's a catch to that question. The question is, are there affordable options to learn Groovy?
Yeah. So just start with Oracle's documentation. So they have several examples, especially for things like data validations, where that documentation is actually pretty good. And I think their examples are very relevant. It won't get into the deep, hardcore use cases for Groovy, but it will get you started. After that, if you go to Kyle's site, which is Into Hyperion, if anybody's not familiar with that, and then the number 2, Hyperion, he has a tremendous amount of free content out there. So, and if you're looking for a very specific use case, he has these little lightning lessons where you're not paying for the whole Groovy training, you're paying for training on this one specific topic, like allocations or something like that. And I think that's a good opportunity, but his blog is not the only one. Lots of other blogs with Groovy out there. I certainly think taking the class is the most expedient way to learn Groovy. but it's not the cheapest. And so it's kind of, you can have, you know, fast and pay for it, or you can have a little bit slower and not pay for it. But both avenues are out there. And, you know, there is a tremendous amount of good content available.
I agree. I just put a link to Oracle tutorials. I think there are some really good examples that Oracle has provided. Which will get you started.
Yeah, Oracle's documentation has just, over the past 5 or 7 years, it's gotten so good. And yeah, it's a really great resource. You know, I was reading a post on Reddit. There's like an EPM cloud forum on Reddit. I was reading a post there about how to pass the certifications without having access to course and conversing. And the answer is all the questions are somewhere in the documentation. It's probably one of the things that it's just very much documentation, but it's all out there.
Static is back on your side.
Sorry, I think it's probably just the hotel's internet connection.
That's okay. Yeah. So I put links to everything that you mentioned in the chat. So if anybody's interested to go check out Groovy, I put links to Kyle's courses as well. I know it's not, you know, cheap, but like Jake is mentioning, you get to learn fast, right? You get to see real world examples. And that's what you want. You don't want to just go through the documentation and read all the classes, and that's not what you want. You want real world examples. So I think Kyle's course is something I would recommend to anyone.
Yeah, me too. So there was a question in the chat. Somebody was asking how they would get their first client. You know, I got lucky in that a recruiter reached out to me, but you know, I think we mostly know who the specialist recruiters are in the EPM space. I would probably start there. You know, if I was just starting out, you know, jump on LinkedIn and start reaching out to those folks, because they're always looking for people like us, right?
Yeah, I agree. Okay, so I had this question. I know we chatted about it. When you go into an EPM project, do you have like a methodology that you follow? Does it differ from the products that you're implementing? Like planning has a specific methodology versus, let's say, FCCS has a specific methodology. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I have been through FCCS training, but I don't typically implement FCCS. It's one of those things where I know about it, but I don't know it well enough to implement. So I'm typically doing planning implementations. And the answer is yes, I do have a methodology. And in fact, I gave that methodology away. So, and when I say methodology, we should probably clarify. You know, I have a series of template documents, for example, for gathering requirements, for documenting design. You know, I've got a template for a user guide and an admin guide, and for a communication guide, something that, you know, a lot of us struggle with is the change management aspect of these projects. And so I've got project charters, and all of this stuff is bundled into, you know, test cases, user acceptance test, you know, kickoff meeting templates, and all that good stuff. I've got all of that bundled up into a series of template documents. And at CaseScope, one year I did a presentation, which was basically how to keep your project, your EPM implementation, from failing. And we talked about the methodology, we went through it, and at the end of that, I gave everybody a thumb drive that had all of the documents on it. And I still give it away. If anybody's interested in it, they can email me and I will send it to them. And in the end, it's really just basic project management stuff that happens to be tailored for Oracle EPM, right? But yeah, I think having the methodology is important. You know, eventually, as an independent consultant, you're going to have to be a little bit good at project management as well. because there won't always be a project manager there to bail you out. Every once in a while we get lucky, right? Especially when you subcontract to other firms, you know, they'll typically there's a project manager there, but sometimes I'm brought in and I'm the only guy or only person. And, you know, you've got to do all that project management stuff on your own. But yeah, if anybody would like that methodology and those document templates, you know, my overall goal is just, I think we all do better when projects don't fail, you know, and even if it's a competitor, I don't want their projects failing. That doesn't help anybody.
Right. One important question for independent consultants.
Yeah.
How do you determine your hourly rate? Is there a method to it? Or you just say, oh, you know what? I know, like, you know, the first thing that the recruiter is going to ask you, what's your rate? And you're scrambling for an answer like, I think they should be getting this much. But is there like a method to this madness on how to figure out your hourly rate?
So I'll tell you what I've done. First of all, you should start off, the people that probably have the most data about this are practice managers in firms, and because they're the ones that are going out and hiring subcontractors when they need to, and these specialist recruiters. And unfortunately, all of them have an incentive to tell you a number that is maybe lower than what it can actually be. But I think the more important question is, what is your objective? There are consultants out there who are maybe later in their career and they're saying, look, I don't want to work as much, but when I am working, I want a really high rate. Or you've got people like me who are trying to say, you know, I want to keep at least 90% utilization every single year. And so what I do is, you know, you go out and you find that rate and you figure it out with just going through pure negotiations, right, with customers and things like that. But eventually you're going to figure out what the market will bear for your particular skill set. My approach is to then take that rate and go a little bit lower. And the reason for that is, again, the difference between a good year and a great year for me, you know, 10, 20 bucks on the rate is not going to move the needle, but 20% utilization more, 20% more utilization, that's going to move the needle a lot. So my objective is to be affordable. I know that I charge less than a number of my competitors, but I do it so that I am really busy. Now, sort of there's a corollary question to that is, and that is, are you ever working on multiple projects at the same time? And there are people out there that do that. There are people out there that can manage that level of stress, and I am not one of them. So I will typically have one customer at a time. Every once in a while, I might have to dip out for a week or so to do a health check for another customer. But usually I'm working at one place and my focus is on one customer at a time. Life gets really stressful when you've got to manage two sets of requirements and two sets of expectations and two timelines, and that's not for me.
Yeah, I agree. Are there any roles that you would say no to, like, or are there any specific roles that you said, okay, this is what I want, I love doing this, I'll take this, but maybe this, maybe not?
Yeah, that's a good question. So some of the roles that I would tend to decline, and I don't decline a lot, but are roles where somebody wants me to come in and do something that I know I'm not good at. So for example, I have had customers come to me and say, hey, I know FCCS is not your main thing, but we like you, we've worked with you in the past, and we would like you to implement it. I'd probably say no there because I don't think I'm going to be able to serve my customer very well. Could I be a secondary resource on a project with an FCCS expert? I've done that, and that was fantastic. Really enjoyed that. but I don't think I'm good enough at FCC to be the main implementer. And so I would probably say no to that. There are certain modules that I'm not a big fan of that I might say no to. You know, I think most people know that I'm more of a custom implementation guy. I like to build tailored applications with just my customers' requirements, with just my customers' metadata. You know, so yeah. Some of the more difficult projects that I don't necessarily say no to, but I'm a little apprehensive of, is oftentimes you'll get brought in to help a failing project. So a project is failing, we need you to come in and bail water. Usually you show up and somebody's already mad, and you know, through no fault of your own, you know, those can be tricky projects, because a lot of times there are politics involved, and when you're showing up new, you don't necessarily understand. The good news is when you show up in those roles and you're just there to help, people know it's not your fault. So, but those can be tricky projects. My very favorite projects are greenfield implementations for a customer that's never had EPM. Because man, when they start to see what you can do with these products, they're very easy to please, right? It's easy to make them happy because they're usually coming from some nightmare Excel catastrophe, and you're helping them go to something that's much more manageable. The admins are excited because they're getting to learn new skills, and they're valuable skills. The customer is excited because their forecasting process isn't going to crash out again. Greenfield implementations are my favorite.
Hey, Jack, I'm curious. Have you ever considered learning another tool, like given that those FP&A tools, or growing, and there are many more competitors now?
Yeah, so I think when OneStream came out and started really gaining traction, most of us probably got that phone call that said, hey, why don't you come on over, see what this other product is like. And certainly for a while there, OneStream rates were very high, and so it was extremely tempting. Now, I got that call and explored it a little bit and politely declined. One of the reasons was, man, I really like Essbase. And that underpinning database that is so amazing, you lose that when you go to other products. And it's the secret sauce that makes Oracle EPM amazing. Other than the fact that, EPM Cloud that was a brilliant implementation on its own. But I didn't want to move away from Essbase. The other thing that I considered was, at this point in my career, I'm not an inexpensive resource. And for me to start over, I'm still not going to be inexpensive, but I'm also not going to be very good. And I didn't feel like I would be adding a lot of value, at least initially, to customers. And so that's kind of why I decided not to go down that path. If I was earlier in my career, maybe the answer would have been different. But yeah, I really wanted to stick with something I know. And part of that gets into actually why I left EY originally. And that was I was getting bounced around between a bunch of different technologies. And you get brought into a customer, and I wanted to be able to add value to the customer. And when you're constantly having to learn a new technology, there's no way you're adding a tremendous amount of value, because some of these tools have multi-year learning curves. So, for me to feel good about the value I'm going to add to the customer, I felt it was the best decision to kind of stick with planning in Essbase.
Sounds good. And just to follow up on this, Jake, any maybe of your clients, have they reached out to you to ask for your opinion, whether they, need to implement Oracle and why it should be Oracle.
Oh, yeah. So I have actually helped customers do a product bake-off. And, you know, you have to go into that kind of situation with being fairly transparent and saying, okay, I can help you structure this bake-off. Here are the parameters. Here are the tools we're going to evaluate. And here's the evaluation criteria. You should know that my background is mostly Oracle EPM, and I might be a little biased. And so let's get some other people involved in the bake-off so that we can balance that out. But I have done that. It was incredibly successful. I learned some things about some of the competing products and some of the features that they do and don't offer that you know, were pretty insightful. And but yeah, I have helped customers through those kind of bake-off situations, and they're interesting if you ever get the opportunity to do it.
Yeah,
A very important question. I was about to ask you, and I see that Luis has asked that question. So you've a couple of times mentioned your specialties, planning, and not necessarily FCCS. I think there's a general notion that you have to know everything in EPM. And I've also seen a lot of people, when I talk to them, they say, oh, I've done planning, I've done FCCS, I know PCM, I know this, and I know that. And the first thing I ask, what's your specialty? I know you know all of these, but
Yeah.
what's your specialty? Sometimes people hesitate to say, no, I'm not good at this, but I'm really good at this. So I think that's the same question that Luis has. What's your opinion on that? Like, do we specialize on one or maybe two specific EPM applications or modules? Or even I've seen a lot of people, like you mentioned, specializing on reporting specifically. Some focus mainly on integrations. So what's your opinion? Is that okay to do that? Or do you think you should have a broader jack of all trades kind of experience or skill?
It depends on your employment situation. So let's say you're working for a large system integrator that does just a tremendous amount of EPM implementations. You can survive and thrive in a firm like that as an integrations guy, where all you do is integrations. As an independent consultant, I think you're really going to struggle, because as an independent consultant, and really as a consultant in general, we want fewer, larger transactions, right? My best case scenario is what I've got now, where I've been at a customer for 2 solid years, right? I'm not having any gaps between projects. I'm heads down working solid for 2 years. If I was an integrations consultant as an independent, I would have many probably smaller transactions throughout the year, which means I would have more gaps between projects, which means my utilization would be lower. And that's the difference between a good year and a great year is utilization. Every consulting firm out there tries to manage this, right? They want fewer, larger transactions because there's less cost associated with that, and more revenue consistency. Now, it would be nice if I could get really good at FCCS. But in my experience, the best FCCS resources are CPAs or hardcore accountants. And while I feel like I know a lot about finance and accounting, I'm not a CPA and I'm not a hardcore accountant. And therefore, I know I will never be the best FCCS resource. I have a shot at being the best planning and S-based resource, but I don't have a shot at FCC. And so, yeah, I could certainly add value on an FCC project where I'm paired up with that CPA type person, but I'll never be that guy. And so, with that said, planning, I mean, that is a broad field. You could be doing financial planning, you could do workforce planning, CapEx, you could get good at the modules. There's enough work out there in the planning space where if you're an expert focused on that product, you can definitely stay busy. But let's say you were, a specialist in, say, the tax reporting module, that you're going to have a hard time as an independent if that's your focus. And so you want to be broad enough, but you also want to be an expert in your field. And I think it's really hard to be an expert in all of these things.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I say, when somebody asks me, I say account reconciliation is my first thing. Like, I love it. I love doing it. That's my first thing. And then, reporting and then planning. So I can do planning. I don't mind doing planning, but I love doing account reconciliation. If you give me that, that's the best thing ever.
Yeah, and there seems to be more and more work out there for it. I mean, it seems to be doing really well as a product. So
yeah, I don't mind saying no to, like you said, FCCS. I would say, yeah, if you give me integrations, reporting, and FCC, I'll do it. No problem.
sure.
I'm not an accountant. I have the same view as you. I think FCCS consultants need accounting background. They need that solid accounting knowledge.
Yep, I agree.
All right. I know we went past the time, but if somebody is starting out as an EPM consultant now, what do you think the way they should approach learning EPM? I know in earlier days, there wasn't maybe these many documentations, videos, and blogs and those kind of things. And I know EPM has a lot of applications. Where do you think somebody's new starting out, which maybe application should they focus on? The fundamentals, what should they focus on? What's your view on that?
Yeah, so let's say you're an accountant. That's an easy decision. FCCS, maybe account rec, those products. If you're a little more on the technical side, but you enjoy finance, then definitely planning and S-Base and all of the related products there. The tricky thing about getting good at planning is you kind of have to be good at S-Base first. And so, I don't run into that many pure S-Base projects anymore. And I actually think this is going to be a challenge for Oracle in that people aren't just learning native S-Base anymore. And so how do you get those fundamental skills of understanding, how S-Base brings blocks in and out of memory? Those are nuanced things where, I don't know about you guys, but I remember the day sort of the light bulb went off and I was like, oh, that's what blocks are. And that's how they come in and out of memory. And that's how that affects performance. And that's why certain caches need to be set. When that light bulb went off for me, it was a notable moment and everything got easier after that. But it took me a while to get to that point. With planning now being a little bit abstracted from S-Base, I don't know how you get to that point now without going to some conferences and user groups. One of the things that I did at Kscope one year that was really fun was an advanced business rule class that talked about, some of the under the covers things that happen when you run a business rule, things like block mode versus cell mode, top down versus bottom up, all of these things that deal with how S-Base addresses blocks and the cells within those blocks. And I think that was a pretty popular class because I don't think there's a lot of great content out there on that subject.
I would agree. I was going to put the Kscope link in the chat. So if anybody wants to check out, when is your session, Jake?
I have to go check, but if you search the schedule for Michael Ryan or Bank of Oklahoma, you'll find it.
Okay.
And it's about workforce planning. So I think it's later on in the week, probably on Wednesday, if I recall. The funny thing is this year, my wife actually got selected to speak at Kscope too. And we are presenting at the exact same time. So I can't see her presentation and she can't see mine. And we're competing to see who gets more people in the room.
Awesome.
So
that's a great
it's
competition.
like it was the worst case scenario for when your wife actually presents at Kscope.
Okay, I found it. So June 18th, 2:40 to 3:40 p.m. Is your session? Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, I hope you'll come see it, and I think it'll be interesting. It's definitely a novel application that we're presenting. I don't know if you saw my LinkedIn post, but we're using all Star Wars data. It's obviously workforce planning, so we can't use real data. So we're using all Star Wars data, and we're actually going to be giving away lightsabers. So we've got 4 lightsabers from Imperial Workshop, and I'm not sure if you've ever looked at lightsabers on the internet, but there is a very interesting subculture out there that takes these things very seriously.
Yeah.
These are not toys. You know, you can upload different firmware to them, change the sounds, the lights. They're pretty neat. So.
Agree. Okay. I know we've been 20 minutes past our time. Jake, this was wonderful. We enjoyed the conversation. Thank you for sharing all the information. I'm going to read
Thank you guys.
the implementation methodology. I would love to have it. Yeah. So
happy to share.
Yeah. So Harsh, Asmat, Fred, any thoughts?
Yeah, that was a huge pleasure. Yeah, I totally agree, Jake. Thank you so much for being our guest and sharing all of those insights. Definitely looking forward, to your Kscope event, and yeah, I'll reach out to you to get these materials, project management related materials as well.
Yeah, no, thank you very much once again, Jake. It's a pleasure.
All right. We hope to have you back, Jake, soon. Maybe after.
Oh, I would love to. I would love to. The pleasure was definitely mine. And like I said, I really appreciate all of y'all's contributions to the EPM community. And I'm aware of how much time and effort it takes. And, I think it results in better outcomes for customers and implementers alike. And, very grateful.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would just say that we are following your footsteps. I still remember Oracle Ace, Kate Helmer from Huron, right? She was the who pushed me to apply for Ace membership and everything. I was like, oh no.
Oh, she's amazing. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of people who has helped us along the way. Yeah. And I feel like we're just giving back to the community. So
that's right.
Well, yeah, the same thing happened with me. I mean, I'm standing on a lot of people's shoulders. So.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, thank you, Jake. Have a good weekend. Hopefully you get home soon.
Yep. I hope so too.
Have a great session at Kscope. We'll catch up either at Kscope or after Kscope.
Yep. We'll see you guys soon.
Yep.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Thank you so
Thank
much.
you.
Everybody.
Bye-bye.